Defence Force Chief Angus Campbell has rejected Beijing's claim that a Navy helicopter targeted with flares by a Chinese military jet was spying. Joining me now is political strategist at Bondi Partners and former Howard Government Minister Peter McGauran. Peter, good to chat with you. So China's aggression towards this Australian Seahawk helicopter operating in international waters could have resulted in a serious accident or worse. How do you rate the Prime Minister's response to this incident?
Abject weakness. The reason that China lifted all of their trade bans on Australia, Kenny, is because they believed we were strong and we'd proved our resilience and stared down the Chinese tiger. And now, when we have a completely legitimate and defensible issue to argue and to take up with China directly, we shirk it. So I'm sorry, this was a lost opportunity and we will be downgraded in the eyes of...
But how do you balance, trying to repair relations with sort of strongly coming out in condemnation of these incidents?
No, very good point. Don't provoke the tiger. Don't gratuitously insult China, which we've been guilty of in the past on occasions. But when they are clearly wrong and endanger our servicemen, as they did last October, the Navy divers with the sonar pulses, then you stand firm. This is a matter of sovereign independence.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers is delivering his budget on Tuesday. He has a tough task of balancing cost of living relief measures with not adding to inflation. We've had the announcement, we know that there's an extra $11 billion getting pumped into addressing the housing crisis, mostly catching those who are most vulnerable, like the homeless and domestic violence victims. How does he do it? How does he provide cost of living relief without fueling inflation?
Yeah, he has to calibrate it because the Reserve Bank has warned that if the budget stimulates consumer spending, then the inflation rate will just increase or be harder to bring down. So there's a lot at stake here because inflation is the biggest impact on cost of living. Look, Kenny, there's got to be a narrative around a budget. The only successful budgets are where people can afterwards say, well, this budget stood for this issue. And by the way, the journalists and media will always tear down a budget by asking people, are you better off as a result of last night's budget? And there's always a column, winners and losers. So in the modern era, budgets are not election winners in themselves. However, they're important to lay a platform, but you must have a narrative. And he's tried to craft one, as you say, which is cost of living and housing.
If he's got to be careful, because if the Reserve Bank decides to keep interest rates high for longer, all the way up to the federal election, are voters going to punish the Albanese government for that?
Absolutely, and this budget will be long forgotten.
Yeah.
The main game is interest rates, the only game in regard to winning an election in the environment of cost of living. But you can see he's let out the good news. He's trying to establish a narrative, but there's a lot of spending in there, so the pressure's on.
Let's talk about the pro-Palestine protests, the encampments on Australian university campuses that have been going for several weeks now. It's left Jewish students on campus feeling unsafe. Is more political action needed at this point in time so it doesn't escalate out of control like we've seen in the US?
Definitely. More political courage by ministers for education and by university vice-chancellors. There's an unimaginably horrific tragedy unfolding in Gaza, Kenny, as we all know, the suffering, the loss of life, innocent life. And students are entitled to protest. So by all means, set up the camps, wave the signs, but that's not what most of these demonstrations are. These are chanting intifada, they're chanting from the river to the sea, they're intimidating Jewish students. The hatred of Jews in Australia is being pronounced, and we have to stand firm against the anti-Semitism. Separate their right to demonstrate from the anti-Semitism so blatantly on display.
But how do you get, if you send in the police, it could just escalate the situation. So what do chancellors do in this situation? Like how do they get it under control?
Well, firstly, they do have to have the courage of their convictions, and they do have to send in the police where there are acts of hate speech, or where there's intimidation of Jewish students. I'm sorry, you can't be both weak and strong. You've got to make a decision. You don't have to tear down the camps, but you have to take into custody the offenders.
Yeah, just come out stronger. Peter McGauran, great to chat with you. Thanks so much. Have a great day.